Hi folks, David Irvin here from the Forestry Division, and today is going to be a pine identification review. This is the bark of our red pine. Red pine bark, as would be apt, always has a reddish tinge to it in general, and it looks kind of smooth from a distance, but when you get right up close, it's kind of flaky. We used to tell our Boy Scouts, cornflake-like bark. Red pine has needles and fascicles of 2. In other words, in groupings of 2. And the needles, as you can see from the upper canopy, always look rather kind of long and lush-like. Red pine is barely native to Connecticut. There's only a small, what's considered native population in northwest Connecticut. For the most part, any red pine you're going to see are remnants of plantation stock planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. Most of this red pine has since been harvested because of insect attack. This is the native pitch pine, and I've done a number of other videos at this point talking about how rare and endangered pitch pine is actually becoming in this state, but this is pitch pine bark. It's very rough and uniformly rough from top to bottom. It really doesn't vary depending on where you're looking in the tree. Pitch pine, unlike red pine, has needles and fascicles or groupings of 3, and they're sharp pointed. I can bring you over here. There's more pitch pine in this area. Here's one right here showing a good example of how pitch pine is often pretty scraggly in appearance, not very symmetrical. And here is another one showing the natural roughness of the bark. And here is our native eastern white pine. White pine is by far the most common pine that you're going to find in Connecticut. As you'll notice, the bark actually is a little bit smoother. It's very smooth on young trees. As you get older, like with a lot of tree species, the bark does tend to get rougher and thicker. But this one right here, it's probably about 16 inches diameter, and it's getting a little rougher, but it's still quite a bit smoother if you're from a distance away than pitch pine or red pine. For further comparison, here on the right is a pitch pine with its characteristic rough bark. Right next to it is a white pine, and from about the same distance, notice how much smoother the bark looks. Alright, so we're going to wrap up with some final details here. We've looked at the bark. Here is the cone of a white pine. They're long and skinny. Notice that. And there's no spikes, or no sharp points on any of the cone scales. They're long and narrow. The needles of a white pine are typically in groupings of 5. The needles are very soft, light green, sometimes even seem to have a whitish tinge or stripe to them. But needles of 5. Moving on to pitch pine. Pitch pine cones have sharp spines, sharp spikes on the tips of the cone scales. And notice how it's round. It's not long and narrow, it's shorter and round. Here's a pitch pine cone that is not opened yet, and it's just loaded. It's just loaded with spines. The needles of pitch pine are dark green. Oh, excuse me. They're dark green and fascicles of 3. White pine is 5. Pitch pine is 3. Compare that, on the other hand, with red pine. Red pine cones are even smaller, typically. Here it is next to a pitch pine cone. Red pine cones, though, although they look similar, they have no spikes, no sharp spines on their cones. That's an important distinction. Pitch pine, even the needles are sharp pointed. That's not really the case with red pine. Red pine is in needles of 2. So here we go. You got white pine, 5. Pitch pine, fascicles of 3. Red pine, fascicles of 2. In conclusion, here's an eastern hemlock with my hand included in the video for size comparison, notice how extremely short and flat these needles are. And hemlock is included here because a lot of people will readily call it a pine, like they will anything that appears to be evergreen. But a hemlock is not a pine, it's a hemlock. You can see how small the tiny cones are. And if you look at the little flat needles on the underside, there's two parallel white lines under them, which is very much like a fir, except a fir has longer needles and tends to be arranged a little more on the twig like a bottle brush rather than horizontally like these. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something or appreciate the review today. Maybe it's a little helpful.